Chubby eyed the sharp machete on his neck without knowing what to do. At the same time, the monstrous figure that Jason magically transformed into just stared at Chubby without blinking or moving a muscle. Chubby felt the piercing gaze on him and involuntarily turned to face it. When both of their eyes meet, Chubby felt like his very being was being read like an open book. He felt like he was but naked and all his sacred parts were out in the open for the entire world to see. He wanted to fold his arms over his chest while getting into a fetal position to cover as much of his body as possible. His thoughts were ineffective in this situation. The only thing he could do was stare back into Jason's eyes. While doing so, he saw something in those unblinking eyes that wasn't obvious at a first glance. He saw what he interpreted to be an endless amount of loneliness, pain, and bitterness. Is it my imagination or do I see pain in Buddy's eyes, thought Chubby. He wasn't expecting someone who had a machete against his neck to have all these complicated emotions. I'm not sure what's going on, but this might be my chance to get out of this situation scot-free, reasoned Chubby after putting all the noticeable clues together. As he was about to open his mouth to communicate with the terrifying figure of Jason, something unexpected happened. Jason, for the first time since putting the machete on Chubby's neck, suddenly moved. He took a small step back while at the same time removing the machete from Chubby's neck. As the machete was being removed from his neck, Chubby, for a moment, thought Jason had possibly heard the voice in his head. That thought didn't last long though. Jason has suddenly swung the arm carrying the machete with all his power at Chubby's fragile-looking neck. "Stop!" yelled Chubby with all his might as he watched the machete getting closer and closer to his neck. Not even a second later, he felt something cold on his neck. Then the next second, he saw the machete exiting the other side of his neck. Bewildered by the thought and feeling of having his neck cut clean through, Chubby reacted the same way any sane person would. He moved his once disabled right arm to check if what just happened was real or a terrifying illusion. He felt around his slightly dried skin for any abnormalities. He probed and probed, finding nothing to worsen his concerns. His happiness was starting to build up in his chest, just waiting for the chance to explode out for the whole world to see. Oh, how happy he was! Nothing could threaten his happiness, not even the terrifying Jason. But, oh, how short-lived that happiness was. In all his giddiness, he put too much force in his probing hand positioned on the top half of his neck. He felt his head shift over about 1 or 2 centimeters to the left. The nothingness he felt before was replaced with something warm on his fingers. He rubs his thumb and his index fingers together to find the wet substance to have a thick and sticky consistency. He had a sickening feeling in his gut that the machete cutting straight through his neck wasn't his imagination. He couldn't believe the reality he was going through, so he brought his sticky fingers before his eyes. That moment confirmed all his suspicions. On his fingers was his very vividly real crimson red blood. Am I going to die? Thought Chubby while turning his eyes to face his beheader. There he stood without an ounce of an emotion escaping his demeanor. The machete in his hand was at full attention, eyeing Chubby's every move. Chubby felt like he was a piece of meat and the machete was a pitch-black hungry serpent drooling while looking at its weak and defenseless prey. One wrong move from Chubby would make the hungry serpent strike at him, squeezing the last ounce of life out of him before ending up in its stomach. Chubby shuddered at the disturbing thought and tried to put it out of mind. From the start of his disturbing thought, everything started to go downhill for Chubby. The monstrous Jason, seeing that Chubby hadn't fallen over, raised his arms to strike him again. Chubby instinctively tried backing up as soon as he saw the serpent-like machete move. That was when he messed up big time. He felt his head shaking unnaturally as if something was terribly wrong. Then he felt his head stabilize for a quick moment before it slowly started sliding off of something that was very wet and viscous. He tried thinking about what was wrong with him, but no thought was able to form in his head. It was like he was incapable of any thought process. It scared the living daylights out of him, and it only got worse from there. His head never stopped sliding off his neck when it reached a point where it started to tilt instead. His eyes, that were once focused on Jason and his serpentine machete, was slowly made to look at the serene, without a cloud in sight, blue sky. The sight contrasted the terrible fear he was going through. Like riding a roller coaster, at the highest point one is bound to go down. That was exactly what happened. He felt his head free falling from the precipice that it was once on. He watched as the blue sky getting further and further away from him. The fall felt like it took an eternity to happen, but in reality it didn't even take a second. Thump was the sound he heard when his head landed on the hard rocky ground. He finally was able to see what his head had fallen off of. It was his lifelong partner, his body. He would have been more shocked if he had the ability to form a coherent thought in his once clear mind. Sadly, looking at the serene blue sky wasn't the last thing he would see. By the cruel hands of fate, his head was somehow miraculously rolled to where he could see both his headless body and his beheader, Jason. Time seemed to slow down for Chubby. He saw his robust headless body slowly fall on the same hard rocky ground as his head. His body hitting the ground made a sound that his ears couldn't pick up anymore. The despair that he was feeling earlier started to melt away as if it was never there to begin with. If he could still form thoughts in his addling mind, he would have thought, is this what death feels like? He would never get the answer, but it would still be okay with him. With his last ounce of strength he could muster, he moved his eyes to face Jason. As he started feeling his consciousness slowly fading into the dark depths of death, he mouthed the final word he would leave the world with, "Why?" Then the darkness finally embraced Chubby and all his wonders. Jason looked down on the knife-fingered gloved hand that was buried deep in his stomach. He watched as his vividly red blood stains the once clean knives, and his blood slowly spreading on his favorite Taffy the Duck shirt. He weakly pulls his eyes away from his grievous wound to look at his soon-to-be murdered Chubby. He looked at the scarred face for any possible resemblance of an emotion to warrant Chubby killing him. All he saw was a smirk on his face. There was no remorse or anything pertaining to him being sorry for what he did. Was this the first time he did this, thought Jason. It couldn't possibly be the first time he did this to someone. In his opinion, only a true cold-blooded murder would be at ease in taking someone else's life. It made Jason wonder, was all the bonding they had earlier a facade to get him to lower his guard, or was all this a sickening dream? He thought back to all the things that happened earlier in the day to see where he could have possibly gone wrong. As he was thinking back, his thoughts were continuously disrupted by the searing pain in his stomach. No matter how hard he tried from that point, it became a pointless endeavor. But there was one thing clear to him, something did go wrong. It might have not even originated from Chubby. It might have come from him instead, but he couldn't remember all the important details. He snapped out of his fragmented thoughts and looked back at the face of the transformed Chubby. The conceited smirk on Chubby's face was still there. The smugness of the smirk made him mad. If he could smack the smugness off of Chubby's face he would, but at the moment it wasn't important. He remembered his parents always told him to look a man in his eyes if you had a problem with him, as the eyes were a symbol to the mirror of a person's soul. So, Jason moved his eyes away from the smirk on Chubby's lips to look into his eyes. In those eyes he saw an endless amount of self-confidence, conceitedness, and the will to cause chaos into the world. Usually Jason would shrink back at such a high level of self-confidence, but dying made him change his outlook on his final moments. It gave him the courage to look into those eyes and not shrink back. He realized the only thing Chubby could possibly do to him at this point was cause him more pain. Even though he himself hated pain, he knew that it wouldn't last for long and in fact could be brief. The transformed figure of Chubby noticed the quick change in the attitude of his new victim. He didn't get flustered. In fact, he loved when his victims had some fight in them. It made him savor the delicious moment when they lost the last strand of defiance in them. Nothing was sweeter than a person's dying struggles. The smirk disappeared from his face, and in its place a toothy smile was being formed. From his past victims, he learned forming a slow smile made his victims' imaginations go wild, which in turn made their weak will that much weaker. He was laughing in his heart in anticipation for what was about to happen next. In front of the transformed Chubby, Jason saw the creepy smile forming on Chubby's face without letting out an ounce of his emotion escaping his demeanor. If you had asked Jason how the smile made him feel, he would tell you it was one of the creepiest things I've ever seen, and if I wasn't dying I would have broke out in a cold sweat. The smile wasn't as creepy in face value, but the intentions behind the smile was what made it terrifyingly creepy. Thanks for watching. If you like the content, please like and subscribe.